Have you ever had a period in your life where you swore? You were a person who used curse words regularly. Don't raise your hand, you don't have to tell everybody. I had a period like that growing up, and I think many of us did. Lots of people around me, especially at school, and on one side of my family, swore all the time. And I wanted to be grown up. I wanted to be cool. And so I started doing it. I started dropping the F-bombs and the S-words, and all the four-letter words were a regular part of my vocabulary. Only I didn't tell my mom and my stepdad, who I lived with. And you know how those habits, they have a way of just coming out at the wrong moment. So I remember distinctly that moment when the first curse word came out of my mouth in front of my mother. We were in the car. I wasn't even angry. I was just talking the way I normally did at school. And her eyes got so wide, and I was terrified after that word came out of my mouth. I also remember what it felt like in my circle of friends when we used those words as a regular part of our conversation. And what it felt like for me was kind of like a vortex sucking me down into darkness and despair. It felt like the joy and the goodness and the life of life was being sucked out of everything. That might seem a little bit exaggerated, but I remember one moment in particular. I was walking with a close friend at school, and all we did at lunchtime was walk around and use swear words to put down everyone and everything that we saw. That's the only thing that we did. And I remember how it felt like there's nothing good in the world. Everything around me, all the teachers, all the people, the sunshine outside, it's all just empty and meaningless. It was my words that had led me there. Words have power. Would you agree with that? I remember another time as a young adult, I got my undergraduate degree in math, and then in graduate school, I needed a part-time job. And so I started tutoring someone. And I was tutoring them in high school math. And I thought this would be a great relationship. I thought mostly what I would be doing is explaining math problems. Turns out, that wasn't my job at all. The person that I was tutoring, she was a young woman who she'd fallen off a horse, she'd hit her head, and as a result, she had had a minor stroke as a teenager. Now, she had recovered from this stroke fully, but the people around her had begun making all kinds of excuses for her, telling her over and over, well, you had this stroke, honey, so you're probably not going to be as smart as you were before. So when you get a math problem wrong, it's because you had this stroke, and you just won't be able to do math the same way as other people. And this young woman, she didn't actually need to be taught math. I spent 6 months with her, and pretty much all I did was this. You can do this math problem. You're actually good at math. Hey, I can see that you like math. I can actually see that in you. And she would figure out the math problems on her own. It was the easiest job I ever had. And after 6 months, she had been transformed simply by someone coming alongside her and telling her that she could do it. The final challenge was convincing her mom that her daughter was actually good at math. And once her mom was convinced, she went on actually to do a degree in accounting, of all things. Words have power. We're in a series of messages right now called Wisdom for Living. And in this series, we're looking a lot at the book of Proverbs as well as some other places in the Bible. And we're taking different topics, different areas of life, and we're saying, what is the wisdom of the Bible about these areas of life? What does it have to say? How can I be going the way that the world was designed rather than opposite of the way things were designed to work. If I go the way God designed the world, the universe, things will go relatively easy for me. Things will be smoother. Things will work more often the right way. If I go opposite from the way God has designed things, then my life will be a constant battle. A constant battle. We've already looked at anger. That was last week. We looked at the overview, what wisdom actually means. This week we'll be looking at words, the mouth. And Proverbs, the book of Proverbs in the Bible, has a huge amount to say about this subject. Way more than we could take in one message or in half an hour this morning. But I would encourage you, we'll be going through 3 main points that Proverbs brings across. And please, please consider these things relevant to your life. I'm begging you, actually for the sake of yourself and the people around you, please take them in. Think about them and put something into practice to improve the way that you work in this area. It will bear huge fruit. The return on the investment in changing your words will be phenomenal if you do the work. So let's begin to look into the book of Proverbs and the rest of the Bible, what it has to say about our words and our mouth. And there's going to be 3 points. The first one is the most practical. And actually, it's the most surface level as well. It's probably the one you can dig into the most. You can access it most readily. And we'll progress from there to points that are much deeper, but maybe a little bit harder to get at as we go through the message. The first point is this: don't talk too much. You can write that right into your notes that you have there in your bulletin. Don't talk too much. That seems like a simple point, doesn't it? But it is essential for life. And here's the scary part. Those of us who talk too much, 90% of the time, don't know it. This is an area where we need to consider carefully. What does my own life, my own habit of speaking look like? What's its purpose? And am I using my words too much in a way that's not helpful? We just came back, as you heard earlier, from this trip to the Access Conference, the conference for our family of churches in Northern California. So yesterday, I drove for 12 hours with my family. We had 7 people in the van for 12 hours. That's all smiles and joy, right? A lot of it was. I'll tell you how most of those 12 hours went. We have one particular family member who will remain unnamed and who's 6 years old, who has the gift of words. And he really does. God has given him an ability to speak, and I think he is going to use that in great ways as he grows older. But oh my Lord, he needs to learn how to control it. Any gift that you've been given, you must learn how to control. It's a power. And power that's not under control destroys things. So here's how the trip goes. Here's how the trip goes. This one family member in the back seat talking and talking and talking and singing. He'll sing about anything. If you say a word, look, there's a tree, he'll make up a song about a tree. There's a tree, yeah, everywhere a tree. If you say something, he'll talk about it for an hour. And then everyone else in the car going, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Hey, did you hear when we said be quiet? Now, I'll give you this candy if you'll just be quiet. Now, if you don't be quiet, we're gonna... Over and over and over for 12 hours. It was a joy, and Dakota did really well with someone else's family talking more than maybe they should have. When someone talks too much, you know what that experience is like. It's an experience that deflates you. It reduces the relationship that you have with the other person, not increases it. Sometimes when a person talks too much, you can feel trapped. Haven't you felt that way before? Sometimes when a person talks too much, they become someone that you feel like you can't trust. It's not that you don't trust that they'll tell the truth or do the right thing, but you don't trust just to be around them. And as they talk too much, their words steadily have less and less power. We're going to be looking at a number of verses today. And so we'll do these verses in different ways so we can keep focused on it. Let's jump into our first verse here. Proverbs 13 and verse 3. This is the first verse from Proverbs about talking too much. I'll read this one for us. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. A big part of what we need to do this morning is just think carefully about what is being said in Proverbs here. Take that in for a moment. Proverbs is saying not just that if you talk too much, it'll mess up your relationships a little bit, people will be annoyed with you. Proverbs is saying that if you talk too much, you will destroy your life. What? Isn't that excessive? Whoever talks too much, whoever guards his mouth, controls his words or her words, will preserve their life. In the ancient languages, the word for life and soul are the same word. Whoever does not control the flow of words out of their mouth will end up destroying their soul. The next verse I want to take you to is Proverbs 17:28. And this one, I'm going to let you read it on your own. So it's going to be up on the screen. You have it. Maybe you've got it on your phone or in a Bible in front of you. Just take a moment in silence, which is fitting, and read this to yourself silently. Wow. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. This is where the Bible begins, practically. It's teaching to us on how to reform, how to begin, with God's help, to solve the problem that our speaking, our words are used to destroy and not to save. We use them in all the wrong ways. And this is the first and easiest, though it is not easy, this is the first and easiest tip, plan, practice that you can put into your life is simply to stop talking so much. If our words are wrecking things, they're messing life up, we need to stop talking so much. Have you experienced the truth of this one in Proverbs 17:28? I have experienced this many times in my life. That when I refrain from speaking in certain circumstances, people assume that I'm far better, far smarter, far more intelligent than I really am. It's great. Isn't this a funny thing? I mean, really, what is the Bible saying about us here as human beings? It's got a very realistic view of how we are. The Bible says if you want to be considered smart, just shut up. Don't talk. That's a little bit scary for what's really in me. So if we want to be considered wise, we need to keep silent. We need to hold our tongues. Let's go to the next verse here, Proverbs 29 and verse 20. And this one I'm going to have us read aloud together. Now that's not something that we do very often, so you're going to have to do it in kind of a very syncopated way, one word at a time. So I'll read it with us and just follow along with me. Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. Do you see someone who speaks too quickly? There is more hope for a fool than for them. Here, Proverbs is not talking so much about how fast you speak. Do I speak quickly or do I speak slowly? Proverbs is talking about how fast do I respond? And in particular, do I take the time to think before I speak? When I'm in a conversation with someone, maybe that's happened right here before church. Maybe it will happen to you right after church in our time as we gather together, a time where we should be connecting deeply, encouraging each other, building each other up. Do I think before I speak? Or am I just in the conversations that I have, am I even listening to the other person? Or am I just thinking about what I'm going to say next so I can jump in as soon as I possibly can? When someone asks me a question, especially if it's a deep question or an important question, do I pause? This is a huge benefit to your life if you will incorporate this practice simply to pause. Make sure the other person is done speaking. Think about what they've said. I know with some people this is really hard, especially if they are a person who talks too much. Think about what they've said and then respond with words of meaning to what they've asked you or what they've just told you. This will be a huge benefit to us in our lives. Next, I want to remind us of a verse that Jesus said. This is something Jesus said again and again in his messages. Jesus would get up and he'd give a message. He'd give a parable or a story that could change someone's life, that in fact have changed history. Only Jesus knew that the people around him most of the time were not really listening to the things that he was saying. Can you imagine this? Jesus was there giving the Sermon on the Mount. He was there giving some of the parable of the prodigal son, some of the greatest teachings that have ever been given in the history of the world. And we can see from the things Jesus said and the way that the people around him responded that most of them were not actually listening to what he said. Would you have been a person, if you were there listening to the Lord Jesus himself, would you have been a person who actually heard what he said? At the end of many of his parables and teachings, what did Jesus say? He said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." What is he saying? Again and again, he's reminding those who are allegedly listening to him that the words might be going into their ears, but they are not actually taking them into their minds, their hearts, and their souls. They have ears, but they're not using them the way that they were designed to be used. So Don't Talk Too Much is also about listening to other people. And this is huge. If we become people who listen to others, we will also become people who are paying attention and able to listen to God. And if you become a person who can hear God speaking, sometimes we feel like God doesn't speak or he doesn't speak to me. But the truth is that God is constantly speaking to every human being in the world. But most of us, almost all the time, are not really listening. If we become people who can speak, who can listen to what God is saying before we speak, we will become people of great power. And that's our final verse here under Don't Talk Too Much, Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. What a beautiful picture. A word fitly spoken. A word spoken in the right way, at the right moment, to the right person, with the right meaning and relationship behind it, is beautiful, valuable, and powerful. So if we become people who don't talk too much, it will actually enable us to speak the right way at the right time. Isn't that what we all really want? Wouldn't you love it if your words could affect positive change in other people around you? So don't talk too much isn't about be silent all the time. In fact, while some of us have the problem that we talk too much, other people have the problem that they don't speak when they should. Both of those have been a problem for me at different points in my life. Sometimes I would talk too much in the wrong situation, but sometimes I wouldn't speak when I knew I needed to. So if we become people who don't talk too much, who are able to restrain ourselves, have self-control, by God's power, we can become people who can speak that right word at the right moment that God can use to change lives. A word fitly spoken is like an apple of gold in a setting of silver. What a beautiful picture. We'll carry on to our second point. Proverbs spends a lot of time talking about not talking too much. And Proverbs also spends a lot of time telling us that we need to be honest. So that's the second point you can write down for your notes, is simply this: be honest. Now, honesty is about telling the truth, but it's about so much more than that. Let's look first at Proverbs chapter 12, verses 17 to 19. An honest witness tells the truth, but a false witness tells lies. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. We can see here several things about being honest, about telling lies versus telling the truth. We can see, first of all, that those who tell lies, or especially who bear false witness, that is, they're trying to deceive other people for some reason, some personal gain, some ulterior motive. Those words destroy. That's the first message that Proverbs is giving to us here. Words that are not honest, that are not truthful, that are intended to deceive in some way, those words actually destroy. Many times the reasons that people lie or deceive have to do with themselves, the fact that they have believed a lie. That I somehow need to lie or need to deceive someone else in order to get what I need. This is the lie that's behind all of sin. I have to take control of the world on my own, or things won't turn out right. Sometimes I have to do something bad to get a good result, but the Bible says that that's never the case. In fact, those words, what they do is they destroy. The second thing that we see here in Proverbs 12, we see that truthful lips actually last a long time, while the lying lips, or people who deceive and tell lies, will not last. They will not stand. This is true both about the lies that we tell, that when we tell lies, those things get found out eventually, don't they? But it's also true in the results of the things that we say. People who are truthful build relationships with others that last for the long haul. Like all sin, this is something the Bible says about all evil, all things that people do that are wrong, they don't last in the end. Doing things that are wrong turns you into a person whose the results of your life will be nothing. They will be destruction, and that will all be wiped away in the end. Whereas versus telling the truth, being a person who is honest, frank, sincere, those relationships will last for the long haul. But being honest is not just about telling the truth versus telling lies. It's also about being sincere. Making what comes out of your mouth match what's on the inside. Let's go to our next verse here. Let's actually turn to Matthew 5 and verse 37. We'll hear another verse from Jesus. Here's what he says in his greatest teaching ever. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. The older translation of this verse, let your yes be yes, and let your no be no. What exactly is Jesus telling us here? He's telling us that it is, and we're going a little bit deeper now. I said as we moved on, these points would get a little bit harder to grasp. He's saying that we need to become people whose inside match what comes out of our mouths. We don't try to use our words to make ourselves seem better or different than we really are. Now, this doesn't mean we just spew everything that's inside of us onto every person that we meet. That would not be good. But we don't try to subtly deceive other people by trying to impress them. What Jesus has just been talking about before he gives this verse, he's just been talking about the practice of taking oaths. So in the ancient world, people were always swearing on things. That's where our word swear actually comes from, because Jesus said not to do it. They were always, similar to what we would do today if we were to swear on a Bible. That's not something we do very often, but it is something that we've heard of. It exists in the culture. In ancient times, people would swear on all kinds of things. I swear that I'm telling you the truth by God in heaven. I swear by my own head, by my own life, that what I'm saying to you is true. We do it today in a little bit different way, just simply by saying the words, I promise. I promise that I will do this. Why do we need to say, I promise? Why did they need to swear on things in the ancient world? It's because their regular way of speaking wasn't true. They said things all the time that didn't match up with what was inside. When I say to someone, I'm going to do this, I promise, and I'm trying to convince them that what I say is really true, it can only be because what I say most of the time, I don't do. And they can't trust that my words will match my actions. So being honest also involves doing what we say we're going to do, and making sure that what comes out of my mouth reflects who I truly am, not an attempt to impress all the people around me. An attempt to impress will only break relationship. It will destroy life. Let's move now into our final point. And this point is the one that Proverbs spends the most time by far on. There are so many verses on this, just in Proverbs and in the rest of the Bible. It would take us hours to go through all of them. And the final point is this: the end goal of what you would be doing with your mouth, with your words, will sum up in two words: speak life. Speak life. We talked at the beginning about swearing and how many of us have had this time in life, this phase that we've gone through. Hopefully it's a phase. Hopefully you're not stuck in an unending childhood and swearing all the time. We have a phase that we go through where we swear. Why did those words make my life and the circles of relationships that I was in, why was it wrong? Why did it feel like life was sucked out of life when I was constantly using those words? Why, in fact, is it wrong to swear? It used to be that was just a given in society, that it's wrong to use curse words. But most people today couldn't even say why it's wrong, and maybe don't think that it is wrong. It's just a custom that we have, something that's from the past. In fact, this is the main position of modern psychology. There's nothing wrong with using curse words. And yet, one of the things that you notice first or very soon about Christians, especially if you are not a follower of Jesus, is you notice that they don't use swear words. Is that just our custom? Or is there some real reason that those words should not be used? Why is it that we call them curse words? We call them curse words because they are words that exist in the English language for the purpose of cursing people and things. What are those words developed for? The F word, the S word, even, people say, the S word isn't bad, it just means poop, right? That's not a bad thing to use, but what is the context in which that word was first used or predominantly used within our culture? It's the context of saying about a situation, or even worse, about a human being, about another person, that they are that. You see how it is a curse. A curse isn't something that we think about a whole lot anymore unless we're maybe watching Harry Potter or some sort of a fantasy show. But a curse in the Bible is when words with meaning behind them are used intentionally to damage or destroy a situation or another person. We said at the beginning that words have power. And I submit to you this, that swear words, curse words, are virtually always wrong to use. Not quite always. There might be a strange situation where it would be okay or you weren't really doing something bad with it. But even when we're not intending to curse another person with them, the effect that they have is to put myself up and the other person down. The effect that they have just in using them in casual conversation is to communicate very subtly to the other people around me that you don't have value. And that's why they are all swirling around cultures and situations that degrade the people who are in them. That's why we see them in the places in our culture where we do, because they almost always carry a spirit of contempt and condemnation. So we see here when we start to talk about speaking life, there's a very practical way to think about it. Curse words are an example of speaking death, aren't they? But they are not the only example of speaking death. Let's read a few verses here. We'll start in Proverbs 18 and verse 21. Why don't we read this one together? We did pretty well at that last time. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Take a moment to take it in. The tongue, your words, they actually carry the power of life and death in them. It's not just that you'll feel a little bit better if you're saying positive words, or other people around you will feel a little bit better. It goes far deeper than that. Those who love them, either toward life or toward death, will eat their fruit. They will experience the results of life-giving words or words that bring death. Let's go to the next verse. Here we begin to get some practical tips from Proverbs about how we can speak life and avoid speaking death. Proverbs 27:2, let someone else praise you, not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips. Don't praise yourself. This is a big part of being toward other people. Being directed on the inside and with our words toward the good of the people around us, not trying to use all of my words and my energy to focus on myself and building myself up. Part of not speaking death, in addition to getting rid of curse words and not focusing on yourself in conversation, is not gossiping. Take a look at Proverbs 16 and verse 28. A perverse person, a person who's full of evil and going the wrong way, stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. What exactly is gossip? It's any time I am saying something negative about another person, and I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I'm doing it to get some kind of pleasure out of it, not for the purpose of finding a solution or helping that other person. This idea of speaking life, really it all boils down to and is summed up best by the teaching of Jesus himself. In Luke chapter 6, Jesus explains to us that ultimately what comes out of our mouths is a result of what we really are on the inside. And that's kind of a scary thing. He says this in Luke 6:45, a good man, a good person brings good things out of the good stored up in their heart. An evil person brings evil things out of the evil stored up in their heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And so as we get to the deepest place in our teaching for this morning, we see that at the practical level, we can begin to not talk too much. At a little bit deeper level, we can start to really be honest and sincere in the way that we're communicating with other people, making our inside match what's coming out of our mouths. But at an even deeper level, the only way to really solve what's coming out of my mouth, the way that my words are affecting other people, is to change what's on the inside. The only way that my words ultimately can become life-giving words of power that God can use to change the world for good is if what's inside of me becomes more and more like Him. Less and less the way I have always been, not focused on myself, but an inside that's actually full of what the Bible calls love. A focus not on myself, but on wanting what's best and good for the people around me. Now, here's the rub. That is impossible to do on our own. It's an amazing vision, isn't it? Jesus, when he was on earth, was a person whose words constantly brought incredible life to the people around him. In some situations, he simply showed up. He spoke. Sometimes they were words of encouragement. Sometimes they were words that were hard because they had to correct situations that were wrong in people. But simply by showing up and speaking, he transformed people's lives. In fact, his words had so much power that he could even transform the physical world around him through his words. He would just speak it, and people would be healed, even physically healed. But the greater miracle is that they would be healed on the inside. They would turn from loving what's wrong toward loving things that are good. The greatest miracle that can ever happen, a human heart turning from darkness to light. Jesus accomplished it again and again by the power of his words. But it's because on the inside, he was full of love and nothing else. But how can we ever get there? We are so far from that. I don't know if you're conscious of it right now, but just go away, take some time off by yourself to pray, maybe for half a day or a day, and ask God, what are the things, what are my sins, God? What are the things that I do wrong? Every time I do that, there are many things that God brings to my mind. But one of the biggest things that he brings before me every single time is this: Isaac, you spend most of your time thinking about yourself. Isaac, do you really even love the people who are around you? And every time it kills me. How can I change from being mainly directed to myself? How can I want more, I want people to like me, I want to be the best, toward actually wanting what's good for other people? That's true freedom. The Bible tells us how we can change. Our final verse for today is Romans chapter 10, starting at verse 9. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified. And it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As Scripture says, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. There's no difference between Jews and Gentiles, between Christians and non-Christians. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so, my friends, when we begin to see the situation that we are in life, that our words have the power of life and death, and that we actually are full of self-centeredness, and our words are destroying more than they are helping, how can we escape? We can do some things, and we need to. We need to stop talking so much and listen to other people. We need to try our best to be honest and sincere. But somehow, we have to become a different kind of people who are able to speak life. And ultimately, the only way that we can do that is by using our mouths, our words, to call on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We must call out to him for help. He's the only one who can save us from what's in us. And so, as we finish up today, let's just pray and let's call out to God that he would come and save us from the death that's inside of us, from the words that we're constantly speaking that destroy, and make us people who can speak life.